When a survivor stood before Congress and said she was taken on a trip with Jeffrey Epstein and other world leaders, the room went silent. No one moved. No one blinked. For a moment it felt like time froze. Because this wasn't just another story about Epstein's crimes. This was about the system that protected him. Shante Davies wasn't a headline or a statistic. She was a woman standing face to face with the people who'd ignored her pain for decades. In that moment, she said what countless others were never given the chance to say out loud. That Epstein's power wasn't only his wealth, it was the protection he got from the highest places. She told them how a promise turned into a prison, how a chance at a career became a nightmare.
Hello, my name is Shante Davies, and I'm here before you today as a survivor of decades of pain, trauma, and betrayal at the hands of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, and the people who enabled them, and a government that for far too long refused to help. In 2002, I was living in California, a young woman with high aspirations of becoming an actress. I was already beginning to make a name for myself in the industry. A person I trusted, someone I thought was a friend, invited me to meet a powerful woman who could help advance my career. That woman happened to be Ghislaine Maxwell. I was asked to give her a massage, though I had almost no experience, and when I did, she praised me and promised introductions to someone enormously powerful, someone who could change the course of my life, and that man was Jeffrey Epstein. At first, I was an excited young woman on top of the world. Epstein flew me to his private island. He listened to my dreams, promised to help, but his promises came with a catch. The abuse began. He told me to keep it secret. He manipulated me with quid pro quo I did not consent to, but I felt I had no one to turn to. He was too powerful. I was just one of the many young women trapped in his orbit. I was even taken on a trip to Africa with former President Bill Clinton and other notable figures. In those moments, I realized how powerless I was. If I spoke out, who would believe me? Who would protect me? Epstein himself was the most powerful leader of our country. Epstein surrounded himself, with the most powerful leaders of our country and the world. He abused not only me, but countless others, and everyone seemed to look away. The truth is, Epstein had a free pass. He bragged about his powerful friends, including our current president, Donald Trump. It was his biggest brag, actually. And while what I endured will haunt me forever, I live every day with PTSD. I live as a mother trying to raise my child while distrusting a world that has betrayed me. This kind of trauma never leaves you. It breaks families apart. It shapes the way we see everyone around us. But one thing is certain, unless we learn from this history, monsters like Epstein will rise again. There are files, government files, that hold the truth about Epstein, who he knew, who owed him, who protected him, and why he was allowed to operate for so long without consequence. Why was Maxwell the only one held accountable when so many others played a role? Why does the government hide this information from the public? This secrecy is not protection, it's complicity. And as long as the truth is buried, justice will remain out of reach. That is why this bill matters. Passing it will, bless you, ensure that the suffering of survivors is not in vain. Passing it will bring accountability, transparency, and prevention. It will help protect the next generation of predators who seek to place themselves above the law through wealth, influence, and connections. This is not just my story. It is about every survivor who carries invisible scars. It's about the weight we live with daily. It is about the families broken and the futures stolen. So I ask you, President Trump and members of Congress, why do we continue to cover up sexual abuse and assault? Who are we covering for? Let the public know the truth. We cannot heal without justice. We cannot protect the future if we refuse to confront the past. Thank you.
She spoke about being flown to a private island surrounded by people she once admired, only to realize she had walked straight into a trap. The silence that followed wasn't sympathy. It was guilt, because everyone in that room knew on some level that her story wasn't an exception. It was the pattern. That's where this story begins. Because the real question isn't just what Jeffrey Epstein did. It's how he was allowed to keep doing it. The story of Epstein isn't about one man's evil. It's about the machinery that kept it hidden. A network of influence so deep that people stopped asking questions. Promises of mentorship that turned into manipulation. Powerful connections that became shields. Every promise was a trap disguised as an opportunity. And the price was silence. Survivors like Shante Davies described the same pattern again and again. They were young. They were ambitious. They trusted people who seemed legitimate. A producer, a socialite, a politician. They were promised introductions, auditions, chances that could change their lives. What they didn't know was that they were being tested, groomed, and drawn into something far darker. And when they tried to speak out, the institutions meant to protect them. Police, prosecutors, even the media went quiet. Justice wasn't blind. It was told to look the other way. Remember the so-called plea deal in Florida? The one that let Epstein serve time in a private wing, leave the jail during the day, and keep his network running. That was no accident. That was the system saying, "You're too powerful to fail." That single decision told survivors across the country that if your abuser has enough money or friends in the right places, you don't stand a chance. But behind the headlines, behind the scandal, there's something even more explosive. The files, the ones the government still refuses to release. These aren't just papers. They're the keys to understanding how an entire network operated. Who funded it, who flew where, who turned a blind eye, flight logs, bank transfers, visitor lists, internal memos, phone records. Each page tells a part of the story that's been buried for years. Survivors like Shante keep asking for transparency, not for revenge, but for clarity. Because those files could finally prove what so many already know in their gut, that Epstein didn't act alone. And yet, every time those records are requested, the excuses pile up. Privacy concerns, national security, ongoing investigations. It's always something. But let's be honest, what they're really protecting isn't privacy, it's power. Somewhere in a locked cabinet or encrypted server lies the truth about who enabled one of the most prolific predators of our time. Why were prosecutors willing to cut deals that ignored victims? Why were agencies slow to act even when they had evidence in hand? Why are financial institutions still hiding behind client confidentiality? Every delay erases another piece of truth. Memories fade, documents vanish. Witnesses disappear. That's not justice. That's obstruction by time. And while bureaucrats debate redaction protocols, survivors wake up every day reliving what happened. For Shante, this isn't politics. It's daily life. PTSD, sleepless nights. A daughter she's trying to raise in a world she no longer trusts. She told Congress that trauma doesn't fade, it mutates. It turns into mistrust, anxiety, and fear that justice will never come. That's the cost of delay. Every year of silence isn't neutrality, it's complicity. And the longer these files stay sealed, the longer that complicity continues. So what can be done? Shante didn't just testify to share pain. She testified to demand reform. Her message was clear. Transparency must become the default, not the exception. She called for an independent review of all Epstein-related investigations with survivor protections built in. She asked Congress to ban secret non-prosecution agreements, the kind that let wealthy offenders walk away quietly while survivors are left in the dark. She demanded stronger victim rights enforcement so prosecutors can't ignore the people most affected. And she called for independent special prosecutors or bipartisan commissions to investigate networks of trafficking where power, money, and politics intersect. These aren't abstract ideas. They're the blueprint for preventing the next Epstein. But reform doesn't come easy, especially when it threatens those who benefited from silence. Every institution that looked away has a reason to keep the truth buried. Financial firms that moved suspicious money, universities and charities that accepted donations, government agencies that signed off on travel clearances or funding. Each layer of protection created another wall survivors had to climb. That's why public pressure matters. Without it, files stay sealed. Without it, reforms die in committee. Without it, survivors' courage fades into headlines that people scroll past and forget. Political leaders have spent years turning this tragedy into a partisan argument, using it for sound bites while doing little to fix the system itself. That's what makes Shante's testimony different. She didn't name parties, she named failures across every level of power. And she's right. Every time a politician dismisses survivors or calls the story exaggerated, another door closes for those still too afraid to speak. That's how silence wins. The truth is, this isn't just about Jeffrey Epstein. It's about what happens when money becomes stronger than justice. When powerful people can buy secrecy. When evidence disappears because it's inconvenient. When justice is only for the powerless. There are moments in history that define whether a nation truly believes in equal justice under the law. This is one of them. Because as long as those files remain sealed, equal justice is just a slogan carved in stone, not a reality lived by survivors. And it's not just about the past. These systems of protection, legal loopholes, donor influence, political favors still exist, without reform. Another Epstein can build the same kind of empire tomorrow. Different names, same methods, same silenced. That's what makes Shante Davies stand so important. She didn't speak because she wanted sympathy. She spoke because she wanted accountability. Her testimony is a mirror held up to power, showing every person who ever said, "That's not my problem," exactly how it becomes everyone's problem. When you listen to her words, you hear something deeper than anger. You hear exhaustion, The voice of someone who has been fighting for years just to be believed. She doesn't want vengeance, she wants truth. And truth in this case means transparency. Think about it. If the files prove corruption, why hide them? If they prove innocence, why keep them sealed? Either way, sunlight is the only path forward. The survivors aren't asking for chaos. They're asking for accountability. They're saying, let the evidence speak. And maybe that's why it's taking so long. Because once the truth comes out, it won't just implicate one man. It could expose an entire ecosystem of people and institutions that thrived on silence. Politicians, financiers, celebrities, and officials who either looked away or quietly benefited. This isn't conspiracy. It's documented history. A history we've only seen fragments of. The rest is sitting behind closed doors waiting for public. Will the pry it opens? The question becomes, how much longer are we willing to wait? How many more survivors have to testify before transparency outweighs political risk? Because make no mistake, the fight for these files isn't just a legal battle. It's a moral one. Every person watching this right now has a role. When public pressure builds, politicians listen. When voters demand transparency, documents unseal. When media outlets see that people still care, they keep digging. That's how change happens. Not through silence, but through collective noise. Shante Davies stood alone when she told her story, but she shouldn't have to stand alone now. Do what can you do? Start by sharing her testimony. Keep this story alive in public memory. Support the organizations that offer survivors legal aid and counseling. Write to your representatives. Demand that they support legislation forcing disclosure of Epstein-related records with proper redactions for privacy, not secrecy for protection. Because the truth doesn't belong to the powerful, it belongs to the public. And if you've watched this far, you already know why this matters. Silence helps predators. Transparency protects future victims. Shante Davies didn't risk everything just to tell her story. She did it to end the silence. And the least we can do is listen, speak up, and make sure her courage isn't wasted. So, if you believe the truth deserves daylight, don't just watch. Act. Share this video, drop a comment to keep the story visible, and subscribe for more investigations that refuse to let power hide behind sealed doors. The story isn't over, and neither is the fight for the truth. Subscribe American Debate Files and get more new videos. Truth Debate Story.